All right, we welcome all teams to round three of NZSDC Nationals 2023. So today's the motion for round three is as follows. This House would abolish national secondary education standards, e.g. NCEA, in favor of secondary schools establishing their own curriculum and accreditations. On the affirmative side, we have Southland. On the negating side, we have counties Manukau. Before we start, we should do some introductions. So would the adjudicators like to introduce themselves and their pronouns?
Kia ora, my name is Megan. I prefer she, they pronouns.
My name is Connor. I prefer he, they. Zach, he, they. Williamstown, trainee. I prefer he, they.
Wonderful. And now we welcome the affirmative side to introduce their speaker positions as well as their preferred pronouns and their names.
I'm Ron Cameron. I'll be doing first speaker and reflect the affirmative team and pronouns of he.
I'm Ryan Cross. I'm the second speaker of the affirmative team.
My name is Benjamin Stanninger. I'll be the first speaker for the affirmative team and I'm pronouns of he/him.
Wonderful. And now the negating team.
My name is Manoya, and I'll be doing first and reply, and my pronouns are she, her.
Sure, my name is Ketan Armstrong. I'll be doing second, and my pronouns are he, him.
My name is David Tomnike. I'll be first speaker, and my pronouns are he, him.
Wonderful. And without further ado, I welcome up the first speaker of the affirmative side to kick off the debate.
The New Zealand curriculum has failed. It is failing our children. The qualification is worthless, and we face terrible attendance. We face terrible engagement from our students. In this speech, I'll be showing you how we fix this. But first, we're talking about how, what we think the motion actually looks like on the affirmative side of the house. What we think these degrees look like, what they're worth, and then how we propose a more effective curriculum under our side of the house. All right, to begin with, what does it actually look like? So, we think because we're now putting more of a workload on these schools, we're going to have to fund them more. Where do we think this money comes from? Well, the government is no longer paying a huge Ministry of Education, because they no longer have to fund all of these groups, these surveys, these polls, these people who write the curriculum, who make the curriculum. This is incredibly expensive because they have to gather huge amounts of data to make a curriculum that works for every single student in our country, or at least pretend to try. And so, and then at these schools, we're now going to need, no thank you, we're now going to need staff who are able to work on these curriculums, know how to do things like that. And we think these positions are likely filled by Ministry of Education staff who are no longer working there and are now available in the workforce. And we think their funding comes from where they were in the past being paid at the Ministry of Education, they're now being paid at a school level. All right. And we think these, so how are we seeing a more effective curriculum? All right, to begin with, at the simplest, schools are incentivized to provide an effective curriculum. Students go to schools with effective curriculums, and so schools have an economic incentive there because because schools receive funding based on their students, but also it is being a government-run organisation, their motives aren't entirely money-based. They do just have an interest in providing a quality education to students. And then, so we also think we have better attendance and engagement with students when we have these curriculums decided at a school level. Sure.
What would happen with private schools that aren't government funded?
I don't think anything really. So private schools are now required to fund their own curriculum because it's not being provided by the government. Don't think this is a huge problem because realistically, private schools already have huge quantities of money. They're being privately funded. They're being privately funded by really rich people who are interested in these paying a lot for a very high quality education. And we think they're already doing a lot beyond what NCEA offers. And so we think realistically they've got plenty of money, they've got plenty of disposable money. And so realistically it isn't a huge harm there. But even if we see, oh my God, all of the private schools have disappeared, that's not a problem. We still have public schools, and that's why they exist, to provide a stable education there. Alright, so we see better attendance and engagement when these curriculums are decided at a school level, because they're able to better adhere to the needs of the region, to what happens in a region, what happens in a town. If we have, for example, I don't know, maybe a farming town, and its schools teach health that isn't really applicable to any of the students there because they're interested in becoming farmers, they're interested in working on their family farm, they're interested in, no thank you, they're interested in like staying in that region and maybe working in the trades there. And like, and so like I think this school is like incredibly like not applicable to them. They're not learning anything useful to them, and so they become disengaged. They stop going to school. They stop paying attention in class. They stop learning. Like this is incredibly harmful because they're no longer receiving any education at all. Like they're just wasting their time. But when these things are targeted to the region, we can teach things that are actually applicable to these students. They can like go home and they can see how the things they're learning in class can be applied to the world around them. And this is incredibly helpful to students that would otherwise face like disengagement. And then we also think this leads to development within the region because now the students are like actually trained to do things within the region that are helpful, and now they're more they're now more able to do that, and so they do it to like a higher level, and that provides development within the region. They get like, I don't know, maybe better farming, better like systems surrounding that. It also leads to like more specialization, which leads to a higher quality outcomes because students are like able to focus more on the bits that is like applicable to them and is applicable to their region. And we also finally think it leads to like less discrimination because if you live in, say, a poorer region and you might have like a lower pass rate, like proportional to, I don't know, a richer region because you have to maybe work outside of school so you can't spend all of your free time studying, or maybe you have like a troubled home life and so you're unable to like pay as much attention at school, maybe you're not getting enough sleep so you can't pay as much attention at school, and so you will have like you're doing worse in school under NCEA. And so maybe you're not passing your exams, you're not getting any qualification at all. However, if we like provide an opportunity for like maybe a degree that isn't worth as much, like it's not worth maybe as much as an NCEA degree would be, but it is a degree that these people are able to attain, and that is more valuable than a degree than like no degree at all. And so we see better outcomes for these people as well. Sure.
Will accreditations be valued differently amongst different schools?
Yeah, I think it's likely that accreditations will be valued differently among schools, but as I'm about to go into, I think all students will be able to access like an accreditation degree that is going to be like valuable to them and is at a level that they're interested in. And so I've got a couple of reasons for why that is. We think like realistically, most populations can actually support like quite a few schools, and so there's likely to be a variety of options available. But even in like really small communities where like maybe there's only one school, and so people aren't able to access like maybe the exact curriculum that they'd be looking for, we think they have like options around traveling, which was maybe not ideal, but probably like still a valid option for them, such as like boarding in like a larger city. And so they're able to access an education that is like attuned to what they want to do, what their interests are. And so by like abolishing this secondary education, like NCEA, we're able to like really specialize down to students, provide things that are valuable to them, interested, like that they're interested. And in doing that, we're able to fix like the key problems with the New Zealand curriculum. One, that like we get terrible engagement from our students. Well, now they're actually learning things that are valuable to them. And so they'll be engaged, they'll be interested. And then like really also the second one is like the fact that overseas, like the new NCEA qualification is worthless. But in a world where like schools are able to propose, say, a much harder and higher level curriculum, but like some students that might not be able to pass like a qualification that's difficult don't go to that school and they don't need to, then these students that like have like these really high goals, like studying abroad, traveling abroad, working abroad, are able to push themselves, study to a higher level, and attain a degree that is worth more and like is attuned to their needs. Thank you.
We thank the first affirmative speaker for his speech, and now we welcome up first Negating. Here.
Imagine you live in a world where your future is entirely based on the region that you live in. The curriculum system is entirely based on the region that you live in. And because minority groups tend to live in poorer areas and are already currently in the status quo at a disadvantage by actually categorizing them and putting them into like a sort of stereotype, as in like, oh, you work in like you go to school in a rural area, so you should learn how to do like farming. It is inherently bad because it leaves absolutely no room for opportunity for those minority groups to do something else and branch out. Okay, so 2 points in my debate. Firstly, on how abolishing national secondary education standards and establishing their own curriculum and accreditation takes away equalized opportunities for students, and how having national secondary standards and establishing their own curriculum and accreditations actually just benefits society. But before I go into this, I would like to start on some rebuttal. Okay, so firstly on the model, we are told by first F that the model will look like how we will fund schools more because automatically there is somehow like less funds because it takes so many funds out of like just to make a curriculum in the first place. Not really sure on why this money problem is not worse if we're now like making more curriculum systems. Okay, and then like secondly on how we have now Ministry of Education staff in schools, so confused on why that's not the current status quo. And then we're also told that the problem with the New Zealand curricular system, which like is one of the reasons, is just because students tend to be like lazy, and they tend to have because they tend to be disengaged with their work because for some reason what they're learning doesn't cater to their region. Really unsure on why this is how high school works. You get to pick your own courses, pick what you like in the current status quo, but the actual reason that they're disengaged is because there tends to be problems at home. There tends to be things like work, and so because of this, like it's because of these problems are still apparent on their side of the house, which means like the issue itself is not fixed, but it's only made actually worse. I will take a POI if anyone has one. So, firstly, on how abolishing national secondary education standards and establishing their own curriculum systems, how it just takes away equalized opportunities for students. Okay, so what do we actually see this abolishing look like? Okay, so we see that there's actually no longer a line that people need to meet. There's no longer an actual standard. The Ministry of Education are no longer actually doing the jobs of what they need to do, which is like, what is something that caters to everyone? Like, what is something that we can incorporate to not only respect tangata whenua, which is also not a thing that is apparent on their side of the house, and like these standards are now dependent on the school itself. So like we don't really see people on the Ministry of Education staff on their team just because like I think it's likely to be the school itself making decisions because that takes out extra funds. So I don't think it's likely to be that way. Okay, so now I want to talk about sort of what private schools and public schools actually look like. Okay, so private schools that tend to have more money, that tend to come from more wealth, are actually likely to be benefited more by this motion because they have more resources and more capacity to actually make a better curriculum system. They have better teachers to actually make decisions. And the thing is, in private schools, when they are talking like when they make decisions, it tends to be actually based on education itself and more like westernized ideologies rather than focusing on stuff like talanoa and things that are really respectful to like indigenous groups in New Zealand. So then what tends to happen is that now when we have different accreditations, universities will see that and will tend to value those accreditations over a public school. So public schools tend to be in poor areas. They tend to have more marginalized groups in there, and because they tend to have less resources, they have larger groups to cater for, they have less funding and more underqualified teachers. Now they're put at a disadvantage that they already had just by being marginalized groups in New Zealand in the first place. So what are the outcomes of this? Students are put at a disadvantage primarily by their schools, and according to First App, also by their area, depending on if they're in a rural area or not. And secondly, there's a hierarchy. There's immediately an advantage for these private schools to actually have more of an advantage to like get into university. There's lower like diversity in universities, as we'll see just all of the private school kids filling them up because they all of a sudden get higher education and things are not equal. Okay, so secondly, on how having national on how this like how the current status quo actually benefits society and how having our own curriculum and accreditations actually benefits society. So firstly, we in the current status quo, everyone has to reach the same bar. It's run by the Ministry of Education, and obviously because of that, they have to look at how do we cater to everyone. And one of the ways that I think they do this is they think about the equity of it. So they think about like how Indigenous groups are already very, very marginalized in our community. So therefore, they want to make up for it and incorporate it more in education to therefore inform more people. This looks like learning about the Dawn Raids in history, learning about like systemic racism in more like philosophical classes, learning about like the different myths and legends that you see in like different cultures. Now, in the current status quo, when we incorporate Indigenous knowledge and stuff like this into like private schools and like schools that are very isolated from Indigenous communities, kids from these areas understand issues from the past and are true. And so they understand tangata whenua a lot more because of these issues. And therefore, even though they are isolated, they are still aware. This is a benefit that they do not have on their side of the house. Does anybody have a POI or anything? Okay, so like what do we see on private schools? Okay, so on their side of the house, what is likely to happen to private schools on their side of the house? Well, we see that because they tend to like cater to the majority of the students, which tend to not be from marginalized groups, and prioritize actual education, they would actually probably cut out most of this knowledge and actually focus more on like international relations to get their students going out and branching out to different countries. And because of this, the outcomes of this tend to be that we have people who are already isolated from these Indigenous groups, more misinformed on these Indigenous groups, which makes them more likely to actually project like racist ideologies and oppress them even more than they currently are. So the outcomes of the current status quo and incorporating this type of knowledge is that we have a better educated system, even the people who are isolated at Indigenous knowledge. We have diverse types of learning, not just westernized types of learning, because that's what we value in New Zealand as as a way to like respect tangata whenua and the land that we live on. And then we also are able to actually get clearer decisions on who gets we're actually able to get clearer decisions on who actually gets to go to university because the bar is set and there is no hierarchy. This is why the mooch shall fall proud to the gate.
We thank the first speaker from the Negating side for their speech, and now we welcome up the second affirmative. Here.
I'll first begin my speech by moving into my responses to the negative team's case. Throughout this debate, the negative team has stated that there will be less opportunities for minorities to branch out, poorer regions will not get as good as education, and students will be put at a disadvantage. We, however, show that this is in fact completely the opposite case, and we actually see better outcomes for these students in these regions because the education is modelled to them. In particular, when we see, we've stated in our first speaker that by having decisions around curriculum being made at the lowest levels possible, we will see the best outcome for students and all those involved. That's because the curriculum will be made by the school. Who makes up the school? The teachers. Who are the teachers? Well, the teachers are those who are actually active in the communities, in the classrooms. They know what's going on. They know what the students' needs are. They know what the students' challenges are. That they understand the strengths and weaknesses of individuals that are declined, so they are able to cater to the particular needs of each student. For example, you know, this works because you have the case of potentially in a particular school, maybe some kids who have really good numeracy skills. And just doing this set national curriculum is not really beneficial, because what would be an hour lesson they get done in 5 minutes because they have these skills. They're not actually learning anything more. However, they could be lacking in literacy, and instead of they're not, and by have the teachers who know what their students can and can't do would be able to cater the curriculum to best suit their literacy needs. So they would be able to spend more time working on literacy, something that's an important skill, so they can improve that and get that to the standards where that needs to be. Accepted?
So how would you cater your curriculum system to just that one student?
Because the teachers are the ones making curriculum choices, and they know what is best for the students in their classroom. You know, this is happening on a very small scale, and this is what we believe at the core of our house. This concept of subsidiarity, how outcomes, we have the best outcomes when decisions are made at the most local levels, directly between the people who are teaching and then the students who are being taught. They've brought up points about how individual schools, this is going to lead to possibly more isolation with, you know, private schools or schools in different regions who may not get who may not get the necessary education around history or, you know, tangata whenua and the Treaty of Waitangi. But we don't see this as really happening, because the schools are still bound by the laws of the state and still have to recognise and implement the Treaty of Waitangi in school. That's how school boards are bound by that and can get in trouble for not doing that. That's the same way it is now. Like, there's still oversight from the Ministry of Education to make sure you are meeting those requirements, but just how these, you know, this history lesson might be implemented. It could be implemented more creatively. Possibly you've got students who learn better in the classrooms by doing stuff interactively or listening. Therefore, teachers who are able to recognise what students might best learn by, they can implement these strategies which will lead to better educational outcomes. And the reasons being for this, if students feel like, you know, they're not just being dictated to by the national curriculum, you know, what they need to know and what they need to do, rather it's more of a personal relationship between a teacher trying to educate, you know, enlighten them and build them these skills, that students are going to feel more engaged in class, knowing that it's the teacher who, you know, they know on a personal level, actually caring for them and trying to really putting real effort into teaching them, rather than just reading out of some textbook, which can leave people feeling like they're not actually valued as individuals. Moving on to my substantive addition to my first speaker's point, is that we accrue benefits to teachers themselves from actually implementing their own curriculum. The reason being for this is because teachers have to implement the curriculum regardless. They're implementing the curriculum of NCEA right now, but it's actually going to be a lot easier for teachers to implement their own curriculum, because they know it. They're the ones who've worked on it. If they know what, you know, assignments they're going to be doing and how they're going to teach them, it's going to cause a lot less stress for the teachers. It's going to make their lives a lot easier if they're not trying to go work with something that's possibly unworkable for them, that's just come out of a bureaucrat's office in Wellington, but has instead actually been crafted by themselves. So they're able to implement and teach with much greater vigour when they may have not been able to otherwise, just having to teach, you know, off a bland piece of paper. So that's going to see teachers better off, less stressed, have a lesser workload, and it's also going to see students getting a more moulded, accepted.
How are teachers going to have an easier workload if they have to make a curriculum?
Well, the fact is that the curriculum, the teachers have to largely implement the curriculum in the first place anyway. They do that currently. You know, NCEA basically comes out with, you know, guidelines and requirements of what you need to do and topic things, but teachers still actually have to come up with, oh, you know, what book we're going to read for this literacy test and how I'm going to mark it and what assignment we're going to do and what area we're going to look at. And so they're already having to put a lot of work into trying to implement something that is rigid and apply it to what is most practical in their settings. It's much more easier for the teacher just to create something that is their own and have much greater ease implementing. And we've also suggested that more support can be given to teachers, because instead of having to employ thousands of people who have to go through developing curriculum, we can give more resources and allocate more resources to schools to do this curriculum development, give teachers more time to do it, rather than how it is under the status quo, and we waste hundreds of millions of dollars of and just employing people who are creating stuff that's not workable or applicable in many parts of the country. Like we said, we're going to see better outcomes for those who are disadvantaged, because they're going to be able to move to schools that best suit their needs, regardless, depending on what they need to learn. This also helps kids who may excel more and who may find the curriculum not very challenging. They're going to be able to shift around. We see this happening all the time. Kids can change schools quite easily with bus transport. It's not that difficult. We're able to have parents who are able to move their kids to an environment that is better suited for them, so they learn better. What outcomes we see? We see better education, better well-beings for teachers and students, and an all-round better educated society. For those reasons, I urge you to support this side of the House. Thank you.
We thank the second affirmative for their speech, and now we welcome up second Negating. Here, here.
What we've heard from the affirmative team is a bunch of nonsense about how they're going to somehow magically cater to all the many students in schools, the millions and millions of students inside New Zealand. They're all of a sudden going to be able to create individual curriculums for all these students. They're going to cater to each one of their personalities, needs. All of these requirements are going to be magically somehow met through teachers creating this curriculum. Is completely unrealistic. Two things in this debate. First on the major clash that has occurred, which is which side better benefits students. Secondly on the split, which is how passing this mission causes chaos in the education system. Firstly, on the split, which side better benefits students? What have we heard from the affirmative team? We hear from first F and second F the pushes on the ease of how easy this curriculum will actually be easy. How easy this curriculum will be created, because it's going to be created by teachers, and how it'll actually give them less work to do. It's going to be easier for them. They make this main push around how it's easier for teachers to make this curriculum, because, well, they're working with the kids. Working with the kids. They're on the ground. This is the only bit of analysis they give us behind why this is true. Three responses to this. Firstly, we already see in the status quo, teachers are extremely overworked. They're extremely underpaid. They're extremely undervalued by the government. We see that they already have low incentives. They try very hard for our students, get nothing in return for it. So we see this as they're already disincentivized. And we see, secondly, that if they are given the job to now create all new curriculums for their schools, for their students, they're going to be even more disincentivized to actually try. They make this push that because these students, because the teachers doing it, that they have this close relationship with their students. Yes, we do acknowledge that in some cases students can form some tight bonds with teachers, but to say that every single teacher in all of New Zealand has this tight-knit bond with their teacher, like they're best friends, is completely unrealistic. The affirmative team has based one of their biggest pushes in this entire debate on an unrealistic idea that all the teachers have best relationships with students, which is completely unrealistic. They also talk a lot about how they're gonna get all this funding from the ministry. They're gonna get all these people from the ministry of education when it's abolished to come and work in school. This is completely unrealistic. This is also completely unrealistic for a few reasons. We see that these people from the Ministry of Education are most likely going to go into other jobs, other ministries, centric jobs. They're not going to want to come down to be a teacher in a school, be an underpaid teacher in a school somewhere. They're obviously not going to want to come to a school, be underpaid, do all these kinds of things. Secondly, we see that even if this is to happen, again, it's the same issue with teachers. They're extremely overworked. Now, not only do they have to implement a curriculum, they actually have to create it and somehow make it conform to every student in the school. The second affirmative speaker used the analogy of some students might be good at math, some students might not be good at English. If we apply this example if we apply this example to every school, imagine the chaos that comes with just 30 students in a singular class. What if one student's not good at this? What if another student's good at this? They base it on unrealistic ideas that they can somehow cater to every single student, which is completely unrealistic, which is why we have standards in the first place. So they have something that's median, not too high, not too low, something that is achievable and attainable for all students, even if they might be lacking in some areas. They also make another push about engagement. A few responses to this.
Point of information.
Yes.
Doesn't this just lead to a nation of mediocre students and then the ones who get left behind as well?
No, because on your side of the house, we get a bunch of students that might know nothing about math, but heaps about English, because they've been catered to their entire life. They've been you only want them to excel in this one area because of the way your curriculum set. It's only based on the kids' strengths. They cater it to students. The reason we have standards is to challenge them to learn, because you go to school to learn, not to be babied around and be given things like, oh, here, you're good at English, here, go excel in English. You have to learn in school, which is the main point. Back to the point on engagement, they say they make a few pushes here, saying that because of the way the curriculum will be set up, they're spacing it around areas and how this will be more beneficial for students because they're learning things based in the area. This is completely false. A lot of students that come from schools in lower socioeconomic areas are gonna feel quite boxed in because they're learning very minimal stuff. If we apply the way they've framed their own case, kids that live in low socioeconomic areas are not going to be getting the quality education that they deserve, to say, compared to someone that's going to a really fancy private school somewhere in the world, somewhere else in New Zealand. You don't get fair education, which is why we have standards. It's unfair to try to change the curriculum to fit everyone's needs, because you create divides in education instead of actually filling them. They also talk about how it'll be more engaging for students because now they're learning things that they want to learn because it's around them. A few responses to this. Again, this is completely false. Just because you're teaching a kid that lives near a farm how to farm doesn't mean he'll be engaged. The reason students aren't engaged is because they're teenagers. Teenagers are inherently don't want to do things. You can't say just because, say, you live near a McDonald's, you're going to teach about working at McDonald's. You can't say that student will inherently be inclined to pay more attention, because students you always get a batch of students that don't want to learn. It's unrealistic to assume that just because you're learning about things that are in your region, you're gonna all of a sudden want to be more engaged to learn. And they also make the push that it conforms to kids, and that parents can send their kids to schools that fit their child's needs. But if the schools are based around the needs of kids in that region, if you take a kid from a different region to said school, how is that going to conform to his needs? They contradict themselves in their own case. It makes no sense logically. What this means for the debate is that their case is completely not very strong. It stands on unrealistic ideas that they keep pushing to you, which makes completely no sense. It's pretty much washed as of right now, which is why we won that clash. Onto my substantive material on why passing this motion actually causes chaos in the education system. For some context, we see in the status quo that with the NZSDC standards, what we see is that students are working to achieve a standard, something that's been set that that the government knows, the ministry knows, university knows, schools knows. This is the standard that all kids should be achieving at. This is the goal that kids are working towards, so that they can then get the right qualifications they need to go into the workplace, universities, all these kinds of things. the first answer mechanism. Firstly, we see that when you remove this one linear standard system, we see that now because the curriculums are all up and down, left and right, we don't get one clear, concise way of standardizing students' abilities and achievements. So what does this lead to? This leads to a lot of schools having different systems, different ranking systems. So one student from one school might be really smart, but compared to another student from another school, they might actually be underperforming. What we see is because of the lack of a linear system, student rankings are actually hurt because there's no way of actually telling what the actual performance of that student is because of how many different changes there are in the leveling system. What this means is that you get students who might be undervalued at one school or superheroes in another school, students that's abilities aren't correctly gauged by curriculums that are supposed to help them. This is why the Musha 4 proud to negate.
We thank the second negating speaker for their speech, and now we welcome up the other affirmative. Get here.
Under the current NCEA curriculum, we see disadvantaged students struggling to achieve NCEA. Now, this is for a multitude of reasons, one of them being because they cannot simply overcome the socioeconomic factors from where they live. Different regions have different levels of wealth. So poorer regions have less access to resources for study. They also have less access to tutors for extra education in case they're struggling or falling behind. Now, what this means for students who live in these lower socioeconomic areas is it means they'll be disadvantaged in their education simply because they do not have the same amount of resources that people in more wealthier regions have. Now, another reason for this is simply because the curriculum is not catered properly towards people in certain regions. If you're in a very rural region, you don't really care about Macbeth. That does not apply to you, and you don't really care for it simply because it's not part of your culture. Now, if we enable schools to change the curriculum, we can make it so that these curriculums caters towards their needs and and their interests. Now, what this means is we see more engagement from the students in this curriculum. Now, this is what we want because in the current status quo, we see students falling behind simply because they do not find the work engaging enough to want to work. They don't want to do school. No, thank you. They don't want to participate in school activities. Now, this is not what we want to see. We want to see students actively engaging in their schoolwork. So catering the work towards students is a good thing.
Point.
No, thank you. Now, the negating team has come up with this idea that private school accreditations are more valued when compared to public schools. Now, under the current status quo, isn't that already what's happening? We already see that private schools, due to their acclaim and their higher the title, you already see private schools getting more attention than universities. So, in reality, the our new world where we are changing it so that we can accommodate for every student, we can actually get rid of some of these inequalities by having everyone have a choose a different curriculum. So if you have let's say, for example, you're a student in a private school. Now, currently by NCEA, you may be being held back simply due to the fact that this may be too low of a level for you to do well in. If you compare that to another student who's in another school where they may be doing, where they may be struggling with NCEA, and NCEA seems like too hard for them, we can't really find, a common ground of the difficulty of NCEA. Every year we have, every couple of years or so, we have to change the difficulty of NCEA to sort of suit all the students and accommodate for their level of education. But this isn't perfect, right? You're gonna have students who are being held back simply because it's not difficult enough, and you're gonna have students who are being who are going to have to struggle immensely for the work. So by having these custom curriculums, we can make it so that these students who are doing extremely well can go to schools where they can get challenged, and students who are struggling a bit can slow down and and can do it at their own pace. Now, what this means is that we won't really have this issue where just because one school gets more funding and can afford private tutors, they can do this additional stuff that makes them have just because you go to a private school, you have this extra fame, extra popularity in terms of universities. If you go to a school that simply hires does a more challenging curriculum, and universities recognize that, you will then be seen just as good as any student that goes to a private school. No, thank you. So this means public schools can compete with private schools in terms of the difficulty of the work. Now, for our second point, teachers can cater towards students. Now, because this is simply because they know students in the region. They've taught these students for many, many years. They know what they like and they know what they don't like. So they can know exactly how to treat the students. No, thank you. So this means they can adjust their curriculum to their needs to make sure that they're getting all the attention, to be fully suited towards them. Now, this also means that teachers can easily teach the curriculum. Since the curriculum changes every once in a while, teachers have to take extra meetings, extra classes to figure out what changed in the curriculum so they can adapt it to their students. And this puts additional stress on teachers to learn a new curriculum that they're not familiar with. When in our world, when they introduce their own curriculums, they consider towards the teacher's knowledge of the course, and they can and they don't have to struggle teaching a course which the students don't appreciate or understand. Now, this puts less strain on the teachers simply because they'll be more confident with the material they'll be teaching. Now, the negating team has come up here and said that, how can teachers handle the stress of extra workload? But just as I said, because we have the curriculum is suited towards the region and they've been teaching in that region for a while, it would also be suited towards them, simply because they're in the areas that the curriculum is put towards. Now, teachers also know the home lives of students. If a student has struggles at home due to maybe a divorce, like with parents, or they're fighting at home, these are very extreme examples, but you have these things happen commonly throughout New Zealand. The teachers can now make exceptions to the students understanding their struggles outside our curriculum. It's not that these students are not trying at school, they might be, but there are factors outside of the students' hands that can influence their education, and the teachers can now account for that and give them, a bit more ease to help them get back on their feet. Now, thank you. Now, also, in case the school is not challenging enough, they can always have an option of going to a more challenging school. If you're struggling in school, you can also have the option of going to a more easier school. Now, this makes it so that you have a bit of a choice. So if you're really struggling, you can make your life easier, and you can go temporarily to another school and then change back. No issues involved. Now, this means that we don't have any of the bottlenecks, of the current world, where we're having students who are performing extremely well and are limited by the school's curriculum, or students who are barely struggling to achieve. Now, schools also have an incentive for the quality of education. So that means the school won't half-ass the entire the curriculum, because they want to give quality, they want to entice students, and they want to have quality of students so they can get more funding. And this is simply why the affirming team has won this debate. I'll be accepting any POIs.
Earlier you stated that if you didn't like what you were learning in one school, you could change to another. But in the current status quo, can't you already choose to go to a course or something else that applies to your interests?
This isn't necessarily about what interests you. That's simply additional work. I'm talking about it's the same. It's additional course isn't just more literacy. You're still doing NCEA, right? So if you're an NCEA level 1 and you change to another school that also teaches NCEA level 1, what has changed? You're still doing NCEA level 1. There's no difference in the difficulty of the work. So if you were struggling, you'd still be struggling. If you're doing well, you'd still be bottlenecked by NCEA. Thank you very much.
We thank the speaker of the opposing side for this speech, and now we welcome up the negating. Here.
Hello. And 4 things I want to do in this debate. Firstly, prove that expenses aren't decreased by passing this motion. Second of all, prove that teachers aren't as able to adhere to all students as the affirming team would like you to believe. And third of all, that students won't be as interested in region-based curriculums. So for today, I'd like to go over the first one I stated. All expenses be decreased by passing this motion. We hear from the opposition that of course expenses will be decreased because the funding that goes into making curriculums will be taken away, and I believe I'll have to finish this off for them, subsidized and divided among schools to form their curriculum. But as my team has been stating, is that the issue of this is that individual curriculums will only cause more, like you will need more resources to be put into it. And all these expenses will what will actually happen is the opposite effect, and that it will increase the expenses in order to pay these teachers to form the curriculums for each student, for these curriculums to even begin with. So it won't be decreased. Second of all, is NCA worse off than the model they have provided? So what we've heard from the opposing team is that that NCEA, it cannot cater to all the students. It's not the inability to cater. That is why it is bad. That is one of the major pushes. Uh, a few responses to this. First of all, as my team stated in a POI, is that is that if you have different interests, there's different sources or there's different ways to gain NCA credits. Say for example, one, whereas like if you don't want to get your credits through numeracy, literacy, you can go to courses for example like woodworks or becoming a tradie, and you can still gain the NCA credits that way. So NCA at a certain level does adhere to multiple interests. They also stated that NCA is worse because each school has different resources. Say there's different ways to teach, but the argument I'll flip this argument on them, in that what you're doing is that you're actually creating this sort of divide between schools that do this and schools that are better at this. And the only solution to this is the status quo, which is to standardize the learning to make sure everyone reaches that same bar. Say and the reason why this specific point of clash is very important is because it not only proves that the model they've given is less effective than the current status quo, but proves that NCA actually has a lot of the solutions to the problems they bring up. Now to the more major point of clashes, clashes, are teachers able to adhere to all students? What we hear from the affirming team is that teachers are able to personally cater education. And first of all, if you are in needing, if you aren't interested in school, there's other outlets to go to. Say that her whole personally being able to cater is quite irrelevant because you are able to choose your own subjects in high school. Say for example, if you want to do computer science over business studies, so students are already able to cater the education around themselves personally. And who knows them best personally? Not the teachers, but the students themselves. Second of all, they stated that the teachers' workload would decrease somehow, but on both sides, we acknowledge that teachers are quite underfunded already and put under a lot of workload. But in effect, what they are doing, they are increasing this workload, which would be symmetric. They're increasing this workload by the fact that the teachers have to personally look at each student and form a curriculum around it.
You want?
Yes.
Is teachers adapting to a new curriculum not harder than making their own curriculum?
Well, if the curriculum is taught, the teachers are taught how to do the curriculum, and it's so much easier when it's standardized. It's all the same. And if it's too hard for you to be a teacher, then don't be a teacher. That's another claim they made, is that teachers know the best about their students. And this is a huge generalization, of course, because everyone is different. You can't just assume just because they all live in a certain region, they all have the same interests. That is a huge generalization and should be just washed away right then. And also the fact, and a rebuttal they gave to this, gave to my speakers is that around the fact that most of these problems that come to school happen at home. They stated that teachers apparently already know what happens at home without giving any clear, concise a line or a connection towards how teachers would know how students operate at home. So what is the outcome of yes?
Do you reckon a person in Wellington who designed the NCEA standard knows what's happening in the homes of these students?
While the NCA standard, especially in the status quo, is based around academics, right? And these academics is it is better to standardize across all platforms because it gives you an equal chance. As my first speaker has been pushing for, what they are doing is taking away equalized opportunities. Everyone from Wellington to Auckland is able to reach that bar, and if you can't, there's other outlets, there's other ways to cater to your own interests. So what we have done is prove that teachers can't adhere to all students. It's impossible, and that the claim they have made that the curriculum will somehow be better because teachers can make them will then is completely washed away due to the fact that teachers aren't able to adhere to all students. Next, for the next point of clash, will students be more interested in region-based curriculums? Uh, one of the pushes they gave, and I'll be repeating myself in this instance, students are more interested in attending classes because it's based around their region. Again, it is a huge generalization. And also the issue of attendance, most of the time, is due to problems at home, which we have proven teachers can't know, wouldn't be able to know as much as they would like you to believe. And that the effects of catering a curriculum would not make kids curriculum around the region would not make kids attend classes more. They and it doesn't cater to, and each region does not cater to all students. That is the mistake they have been making repeatedly. They assume that the region can cater to all students. And again, as I have stated, that all students are different, all students have different interests. That's why there's all these other fields these multiple fields and multiple branches that people can go to. So what I have done today is only prove that students won't be more interested in region-based curriculums, and also teachers aren't able to adhere to all students, and that expenses will only increase by passing this motion, and NCA as a whole is better off for the status in the status quo, and that is why I am so proud to negate.
We thank the negating speaker for that speech, and now as is customary, we'll resume the speaking order, and now we welcome up the negating reply. Here.
A world where the education system is narrowed down to the region that you live in. An education system where the curriculum is based on what a teacher's views on you. An education system that tries to make up for a school of 2,000 students and tries to cater for all of them when they're already underfunded, underpaid, and overworked. This is the education system that we see on the affirmative side. The metric the debate should be judged on is the capacity in which the education system is more effective. 3 points that I'm going to be talking about. The first and most important one is education more effective on their side of the house. And then secondly, to extend the margins, the benefits to students. And then thirdly, on the model itself and teachers. Okay, so firstly, on is education more effective? Okay, so I think the main push that we see from side affirming is the fact that all of a sudden it's more adaptable to teachers to create their own education system because they created it themselves. However, I think it's easier to adapt to an education system that you've relied on for years and that has been in the country for years rather than creating the education system itself, or moving to a new school and having to adapt to that education system. We also see that adaptability was a huge thing on their side of the house because they aim to cater for all students. However, I think the odd thing about this is every single example that they pulled up is like, imagine you're a student, singular. There's no group involved. You cannot categorize a bunch of people into one group that only likes English, that only likes this thing. But I also want to talk about, on our side of the house, the actual diversity of NCEA. I think the second that they lose is the point where they misunderstand what NCEA actually is. You can choose your courses. There is the same bar. If you do not feel that you are good at maths, you can drop it in year 12. If you feel that you want to do business studies, you can take it. If you're more of an art student, take art. There is no restrictions on like what you're actually supposed to do. Well, on their side of the house, they might just cater English to just one specific student when there are 2,000 students in the school. Okay, so now that we've cleared that out, I want to talk about like what that actually means in this debate. So if we're able to prove if education is actually more effective on our side of the house, I think immediately that just gives us the win on how we manage to deal with their three main pressures. But just to like extend the margins a little bit, I want to talk a bit about their model. Okay, so firstly, I think we get a bit lost here at first F when we get told that the Ministry of Education staff will be helping out in this curriculum system, but then at second F we're told that it's now teachers. Now I have, as for the reason that I have just told you, stress of teachers and the fact that they might not actually know their students that well is a huge harm and like hugely doesn't weigh greatly in this debate. But then thirdly, like on engagement, I think the second that they lose on this point of clash is where they lack of understanding of why students are disinterested in school in general. The reason why this is so important is because that is the main thing that they pin on why the education system is failing. So they needed to prove that on their side of the house it would be more engaged. Did they do that? No. They categorized that students were now disinterested, and therefore by catering and generalizing 2,000 students into one group, all of a sudden they're going to be interested in things again. When we see the same thing, we see the same diversity on our side of the house. And also on actual university entrance, it was brought up that universities somehow understand the disadvantage, understand how people work, and that's not the way it is. Therefore, we have proven to you that education is more effective on our side of the house. Students are more benefited on our side of the house, and the model does not stand. Just proud to affirm. Sorry.
We thank the negating reply for that speech, and now to close the debate, we welcome up affirmative reply. Hear, hear.
We told you at first affirming that the NCEA is failing children in two key ways. One, the qualification isn't actually worth anything, and two, they're facing terrible attendance and engagement. Alright, first of all, what happened in this debate around like the quality of the qualification? Well, the negating team has provided like no substantive mechanisms to how this qualification is going to be maybe worth less under our side of the house. Whereas we told you at first, and we told you at second, we told you at third that it's going to provide like a greater like level of qualification. The qualification is going to be worth more because we're able to have students working to a higher level, because like there's now a greater range of schools and like curriculums and degrees that they can go to. But we also told you that it benefits people who maybe aren't passing NCEA because they're now able to go for a degree that is worth possibly less, but we think that that degree is better than having no degree at all. And so we told you first, second, and third about how the qualification is going to be worth more, but also we're going to be benefiting people who aren't able to meet the current NCEA qualification by providing them with alternatives. All right. And then we thought the second problem with the New Zealand curriculum was around attendance and engagement of students. This one we have received some pushback from the negating team. To begin with, even if we accept all of that pushback and we see no benefit in engagement, we've already won this debate at the point in time in which we at which we've helped the qualification be worth more, helped students actually get jobs in like the real world. But they've told us that that like we've misanalyzed the reasons that students are disengaged and that they're actually disengaged because of maybe troubled home life, they have to work outside of school. But this aspect of the of their disengagement is actually symmetric. Whereas we told you at first, second, and third that we see greater engagement because like the curriculum is now more relevant to them because they're able to pick what they're learning more, and like it's able to be more specialized to where they live, and they're able to see it outside of school being put into action. And so we think maybe not as big as we said at first, but we see like an increase in attendance and engagement within this debate. And so now we find like on both of those metrics that we told you at first were like most important within this debate, and we've had no response from the negating team. All right, now let's look at what the negating case. They told us at first negating that like our system was going to be discriminatory. It wasn't going to teach, Indigenous ideas. It wasn't going to teach about like all of these beliefs that are like clearly important. But like we gave you rebuttal about how like there's still protections for these people, and there's still like legality around like completely like just lying about what's happened to them and all of these things. And so we see that like this actually isn't going to happen much, and we've had like no real response to that rebuttal. And then kind of the main second substantial point from the game team was about chaos within the education system, because like now you can't directly compare students, but like there was no impact of this, and we don't really see it like having any relevance in this debate. Thank you.
We thank all speakers for a wonderful debate. Feel free to cross the floor and shake hands.
Oh wait, this is James' phone.
Good job. Good job.